joining us. The two poets we are focusing on today, Richard Wilbur and Frank O'Hara, were born 5 years apart, almost 100 years ago. Wilbur in 1921 and O'Hara in 1926. Both are important American poets, totally different in styles and contents. Wilbur, I studied in college. O'Hara, I discovered in Donald Allen's The New American Poetry, 1945-1960, Grove Press. Here's the marvelous John Towey to present the poetry of Richard Wilbur.
Thank you, Harry. Bless you. People don't really know him, and I didn't talk about him in the last half hour of poetry that I did a week ago or so. He received 2 Pulitzer Prizes over his lifetime. The first one was his adaptation of The Misanthrope, Molière's The Misanthrope, which, if you know anything about Molière, he wrote all of his plays in rhyming couplets. And just imagine what it'd be like to do rhyming couplets in English. Just almost impossible, but he did it. And he got a Pulitzer Prize for it. He won a second Pulitzer Prize when this book came out, which is new and collected. You can't read it because it's new and collected poems. 250 poems in this book. But he won tons of poetry prizes all during his life. I wound up carrying on a 20-year correspondence with him. He'd write me letters and tell me when some poem of his was going to appear in the New Yorker, where they all appeared before they went into book form. So he'd call me up. He didn't call me. He would write to me and say, there's a poem that might suit your acting purposes that's going to appear in the New Yorker next week. So he'd give me a heads up on that. But we had a wonderful relationship. But he lived to be 96 and died in 1994, I think. Not sure about that date. I should be, but I'm not. So I have another half hour of his stuff memorized, which I did a long time ago. So I don't think there's anything else I need to tell you. I'm going to start out with a thing called Two Voices in a Meadow, a milkweed and a stone. The milkweed. Anonymous as cherubs over the crib of God, white seeds are floating out of my burst pod. What power had I before I learned to yield? Shatter me, great wind, and I shall possess the field. And the other is a stone. As casual as cow dung under the crib of God, I lie where chance would have me, up to the ears in sod. And why should I move? To move befits a light desire. The sill of heaven would founder, did such as I aspire. Those are those 2 little short quatrains. The next one is a child's poem. It's called Boy at the Window. And this is, most of these are all in iambic pentameter. And most of them are quatrains, 4 at a time, and it's A, B, B, A, B, B, A, usually. Boy at the Window. Seeing the snowman standing all alone in dusk and cold was more than he could bear. The small boy weeps to hear the wind prepare a night of gnashings and enormous moan. His tearful sight can hardly reach to where the pale-faced figure with bitumen eyes returns him such a God-forsaken stare as outcast Adam gave to paradise. But the man of snow is nonetheless content, having no wish to go inside and die. Still, he's moved to see the youngster cry. The frozen water is his element. He melts enough to drop from one soft eye a trickle of the purest rain, a tear. But the child at the bright pane, surrounded by such light, such love, such warmth, and so much fear. It's called The Boy at the Window. In his younger years, he lived in New Jersey. And This is a poem that he wrote about a black man who worked for his father. And the poem's called He Was. He was a brown old man with a green thumb. I can remember the squeak on stones of his hoe, the chug, choke, and high madrigal wheeze of the spray cart bumping below the sputtery leaves of the apple trees. But he was all but dumb, who filled some quarter of the day with sound, all of my childhood long. Of all his sounds, from all his labors, I can now recall never a single word. Until he went in the dead of fall to the drowsy underground. Having planted a young orchard with so great care in that last year that none was lost, and May aroused them all, the leaves saying the land's praise to the livening clay, and the found voice of his buried hands rose in the sparrowy air. It's called He Was. Then in his adolescence, he looks at a postcard. Now, you just have to know two things that everybody knows. Matthew Brady was the great photographer during the Civil War, and there was a great battle called Wilderness. And those two are mentioned in this poem. It's called Looking into History. Now, he's looking at a postcard-sized photograph. 5 soldiers, fixed by Matthew Brady's eye, stand in a land subdued beyond belief. Belief might lend them life again. I try like orphaned Hamlet working up his grief to see my spellbound fathers in these men who, breathless in their amber atmosphere, show but the postures men affected then and the finished faces of a finished year. The guns and gear and all are strange, until beyond the tents I glimpse a file of trees verging a road that struggles up a hill. They're sycamores. The long abated breeze flares in those boughs, I know, and hauls the sound of guns and the great forest in distress. Fathers, I know my cause, and we are bound beyond that hill to fight at Wilderness. That's a thing called Looking into History. Now, in the early 50s, he was given a Guggenheim Fellowship, and he went to Rome. He was there for a couple of years. He took his wife, Charlotte. Charlie was his nickname for her. And while he was there, and my wife and I went there a couple of years ago, and we stayed in a boutique hotel about 5 blocks from the Spanish Steps. I've known this poem before that, and on the roof of this hotel, there was a restaurant, and I looked down the street, and there was the Spanish Steps, which I'd never seen before. So after we finished supper, I said, I have to go and look at these. And so I went down, and the poem is called Piazza di Spagna, Early Morning. So I thought, I'm going to go down there tomorrow morning before anybody is there, because it was very crowded, and I'm going to reconnect to this poem again. I actually filmed it with my iPhone, walking down the stairs, big, long, wonderful stairs in marble. But in the morning, they were all swept off, and it was dark, and there was nobody there. So this is the poem written about his wife. Odd beats in the lines. First line is just, I can't forget. It's called Piazza di Spagna, Early Morning. I can't forget how she stood at the top of that long marble stair, amazed. Then with a sleepy pirouette, went dancing slowly down to the fountain, quieted square. Nothing upon her face but some impersonal loneliness. Not then a girl, but as it were a reverie of the place, a call for falling glide and whirl, as when a leaf, petal, or thin chip is drawn to the falls of a pool, and circling a moment above it, rides on over the lip. Perfectly beautiful, perfectly ignorant of it. And that's called Piazza di Spagna, early morning. Now, he met a guy over there who could supposedly read minds. This is the longest poem I've memorized of his. It's called The Mind Reader. And this mind reader was also a drinker. So it goes like this. The two of them are sitting together, and he's talking to Richard Wilbur. He got to know him. Some things are truly lost. Think of a sun hat laid for a moment on a parapet, while three young women, one perhaps in mourning, talk in the crinolet shade. Now, a slight wind plucks and budges it. It scuffs to the edge and then cartwheels into a giant view of some description. Haggard escarpments, if you like, plunge down through mica shimmer, through a moss of pine, amidst which here or there a half-seen river lobs up a blink of light. And the sunhead falls with what free slurps, stoops, and slopes you can imagine, down through that reeling vista or another, unseen by any, even by you or me. It is as when a pipe wrench, catapulted from the jounced back of a pickup truck, dives headlong into a bushy culvert. Or a book whose reader is asleep, garbling the story, glides from beneath his steamer chair and yields its flurried pages to the printless sea. It is one thing to escape from consciousness, as such things do, another to be pent in the dream cache or stony oubliette of someone's head. And they found when I was little that I could tell the place of missing objects. I stood by the bed of a girl or the frayed knee of an old man whose face was lost in shadow. When did you miss it? People would be saying, where'd you see it last? And then those voices came querying or replying, came to sound like cries of birds when the leaves race and whiten, when black overcast is shelving over. Not that the mind is a landscape, but if it were, there would in such case be a tilted moon wheeling beyond that wood through which you groped, its fine spokes breaking in the tangled thickets. Now, there would be obfuscations, paths which led to dried up stream beds, hemlocks which invited through shiny clearings to a groundless shade, and yet in a sure stupor, you would come at once upon dilapidated cairns, abraded moss, and half-healed blazes, leading to where, around the turning of a fear, the lost thing shone. Imagine a railway platform, the long cars coming to a cloudy halt beside it, and the windows offering a view neither to those within nor those without. Now, in the crowd, forgive my predilection, is a young woman standing amidst her luggage, expecting to be met by you, a stranger. See how she turns her head, the eyes engaging and disengaging, pausing, shying away. It's like that, where things put out of mind, as the queer saying goes. A lost key hangs trammeled in threads by what you come to see as the webbed darkness of a sewing basket, flashing a little. Or a photograph misplaced in an old ledger turns its oblivious profile to rebuff your vision, yet glistens with the fixative of thought. What can be wiped from memory? Not the least meanness, obscenity, humiliation, terror which made you clench your eyes, or the pulse of happiness which quickened your despair. Nothing can be forgotten, as I'm not permitted to forget. It was not far from that to this corner cafe table where with my lank gray hair and vatty gaze I sit and drink at the receipt of custom. They come here day and night, so many people. Sad women of the quarter dressed in black as to a black confession. Blinking clerks who half suppose that Taurus ruminates upon their destinies. Or men of affairs down from Milan to cleared with the Magus before they buy or sell some stock or other. My fellow drunkards. Fashionable folk, mocking and ravenously credulous, and skeptics are bent on proving me a fraud, for fear that some small wonder, unexplained, should leave a fissure in the world, and all St. Michael's hosts come flapping back. Well, I give them paper and pencil, turn away and light a cigarette, as you've seen me do. They write their questions, fold them up. I lay my hand on theirs and go into my frenzy, raising my eyes to heaven, snorting smoke, lolling my head as in the fumes of Delphi, and then with shaken, spirit-guided fingers set down the oracle. All that, of course, is trumpery, since 9 times out of 10, what words float up within another's thought surface as soon in mine, unfolding there like paper flowers in a water glass. In the 10th case, I sometimes cheat a little. That shocks you, but consider what I do cannot, so most conceive, be done at all. And when I fail, I'm a charlatan even to such as I have once astounded. Whereas a tailor can miscut my coat and be a tailor still. I tell you this because you know that I have the gift, the burden. Whether or not I put my mind to it, the world usurps me ceaselessly. My sixth and never-resting sense is a cheap room, black with the anger of insomnia, whose wallboards vibrate and mutter with the flushings and of the race. What should I tell them? I have no answers. Set your fears at rest, and I scribble when I must. Your paramour is faithful and your wife is unsuspecting. You were not seen that day beneath the fig tree. Still be more cautious. If the time is ripe, expect promotion. If profit is in it, you should take the gamble. As for these fits of weeping, they will pass. It doesn't matter that my lies are bald and my evasions casual. It contents them not to have spoken, yet to have been heard. What more do they deserve? If I could give it, mute breathers as they are of selfish hopes and small anxieties, faith, justice, valor, all those reputed rarities of soul, confirmed in marble by our public statues, where you may be sure that they are rare indeed, where the soul mopes in private, and I listen. You know, sometimes I wonder if the blame is mine, if through a sullen fault to the mind's ear, I miss a resonance in all their fretting. Is there some huge attention, do you think, which suffers us and is inviolate, to which all hearts are open, which remarks the sparrow's weighty fall, and overhears in the worst rancor and deflected sweetness? I should be glad to know it. Meanwhile, saved by the shrewd habit of concupiscence, which like a visor narrows my regard, and drinking studiously until my thought is a blind lowered almost to the sill, I hanker for that place beyond the sparrow, where the wrench beds in mud, the sunhead hangs in densest branches, and the book is drowned. Ah, you've read my mind. Well, one more, perhaps, just a mezzo litro. Grazie, professore. It's called The Mind Reader. It's called an event. as if a cast of grain leapt back to the hand, a landscape full of small black birds intent on the far south convene at some command at once in the middle of the air, and once are gone with headlong and unanimous consent from the pale trees and fields they'd settled on. What is an individual thing? They roll like a drunken fingerprint across the sky, or so I give their image to my soul, until, as if refusing to be caught by any singular vision of my eye, or in the nets and cages of my thought, they tower up, shatter, mad in space with the divergences, are each alone swallowed from sight, leaving me in this place, shaping these images to make them stay. Meanwhile, in some formation of their own, they fly me still and steal my thoughts away. It is by words and the defeat of words, down sudden vistas of the vain attempt, that for a flying moment one may see by what cross purposes the world is dreamt. That's an event I have next here. A summer morning. Her young employers, having got in late from seeing friends in town and scraped the right front fender on the gate, will not, the cook expects, be coming down. She makes a quiet breakfast for herself. The coffee pot is bright and the jelly where it should be on the shelf. She breaks an egg into the morning light. Then with bread knife lifted, stands and hears the sweet, efficient sounds of thrush and catbird, and the snip of shears where in the terrace backward of the grounds, the gardener works before the heat of day. He straightens for a view of the big house, ascending stony gray out of his bed's mosaic with the dew. His young employers having got in late, he and the cook alone receive the morning on their old estate, possessing what the owners can but own. It's called A Summer Morning. A wedding toast. In 1971, I think it was, one of his sons got married, and he wrote a poem called A Wedding Toast. I don't know if he ever did it at the son's reception for the marriage, but this is what it is. St. John tells how at Cana's wedding feast, the water pots poured wine in such amount that by his sober count, there were 100 gallons at the least. It made no earthly sense. Unless to show that whatsoever love elects to bless brims with a sweet excess that can without depletion overflow. Which is to say that what love sees is true. Love's fullness is not made, but found. Life hungers to abound and pour its plenty out for such as you. Now, if your two loves will lend an ear to mine, I toast you both, good son and dear new daughter. May you not lack for water, and may that water smack of Cana's wine. Wedding toast. Love it. Okay, this is called Flying. I have it taped in the back of my book because it was never put into the book. It came out in 2009, and this book came out 10 years earlier. And it's called Flying. 4 quatrains. A, B, B, A, A, B, B, A. Flying. Treetops are not so high, nor I so low, that I don't instinctively know how it would be to fly through gaps that the wind makes when the leaves arouse, and there's a lifting of boughs that settle and lift again. Whatever my kind may be, it's not absurd to confuse myself with a bird, for the space of a reverie. My species never flew, but I somehow know that somewhere long ago, I almost adapted to. Okay, and the last one here, I know I probably haven't gone a half an hour. Maybe I have. Well, with the door of the interruption. This is the poem that appears at the end of any of his books. 250 in this one. This is the last poem in the book. And he wrote it when he was 26, and he had fallen in love with Charlotte Ward. But it's always the last poem in any book that this is in. And the last word in the last of the 250 poems is the word wonder. Discover that that was Einstein's word for God. Who knew? A couple of French philosophers used the word God and wonder interchangeably. Okay. It's a little hard to follow sometimes, but this is called The Beautiful Changes. One wading a fall meadow finds on all sides the Queen Anne's lace lying like lilies on water. It glides so from the walker, it turns dry grass to a lake. As the slightest shade of you valleys my mind in fabulous blue lucerne. The beautiful changes. As a forest is changed by a chameleon tuning his skin to it. As a mantis arranged on a green leaf grows into it, makes the leaf leafier, and proves that any greenness is deeper than anyone knows. Your hands hold roses always in a way that says, they're not only yours. The beautiful changes in such kind ways, wishing ever to sunder things and things selves for a second finding, to lose for a moment all that it touches, back to wonder. And that's it. Thanks for your silent applause, Harry. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for that superlative presentation. And it was a wonderful ending, too. So thank you for gracing our screen with your wonderful words and the way you interpreted them. I'm sure that Richard Wilbur, who's one of the greats of all the formalist poets, would have loved. Next, we're going to hear Corrine and Valerie read the poetry of Frank O'Hara. Frank O'Hara's picture was in the New York Post in 1966 when he was run over and killed by a dune buggy on Fire Island. Dead at 40, a hero to many young poets, he was a member of the New York School along with John Ashbery and Kenneth Cope. His poems were observations of New York City, jazz, art, movies. He loved movies. He said that the only American poets, quote, better than the movies, quote, were William Carlos Williams, Hart Crane, and Walt Whitman. He wrote about his loves, French surreal poetry, his daily life, Russian poetry. He wrote about his poetics in his manifesto, Personism, quote, one of its minimal aspects is to address itself to one person, end of quote. To me, it's like taking the energy one would use in a phone call and channeling that into a poem. O'Hara worked at the Museum of Modern Art. The poems read today are from his City Lights published Lunch Poems, 1964. It's from the Pocketbook series. Here are, in this order, two magnificent readers, Corrine Conley and Valerie Elson, to read the poems of Frank O'Hara. Corrine Conley.
Thank you, Harry. A Step Away from Them by Frank O'Hara. It's my lunch hour. So I go for a walk among the hung-colored cabs. First, down the sidewalk where laborers feed their dirty, glistening torsos sandwiches and Coca-Cola with yellow helmets on. They protect them from the falling bricks, I guess. Then onto the avenue where the skirts are flipping above heels and blow up over grates. The sun is hot. But the cabs stir up the air. I look at bargains and wristwatches. There are cats playing in the sawdust. On to Times Square, where the sign blows smoke over my head, and higher the waterfall pours lightly. A Negro stands in the doorway with a toothpick, languorously agitating. A blonde chorus girl clicks. He smiles and rubs his chin. Everything suddenly honks. It is 12:40 of a Thursday. Neon and daylight is a great pleasure, as Edwin Denby would write, as are light bulbs in daylight. I stop for a cheeseburger at Juliet's Corner. Julietta Massina, wife of Federico Fellini, a Bellatrice, and chocolate malted. A lady in foxes on such a day puts her poodle in a cab. There are several Puerto Ricans on the avenue today, which makes it beautiful and warm. First, Bunny died, then John Latouche, then Jackson Pollock. But is the earth as full as life was full of them? And one has eaten and one walks past the magazines with nudes and the posters for Bullfight and the Manhattan Storage Warehouse, which they'll soon tear down. I used to think they had the Armory show there. A glass of papaya juice and back to work. My heart is in my pocket. It is Poems by Pierre Reverdy. Cambridge. It is still raining, and the yellow-green cotton fruit looks silly round a window giving out on winter trees with only 3 drab leaves left. A hot plate works. It is the sole heat on earth, and instant coffee. I put on my warm corduroy pants, a heavy maroon sweater, and wrap myself in my old maroon bathrobe, just like Pasternak in Marburg. They say Italy and France are colder, but I'm sure that Germany's at least as cold as this. And lacking the master's inspiration, I may freeze to death before I get out into the white rain. I could have left the window closed last night, but that's where health comes from. His breath from the Urals drawing me into flame like a forgotten cigarette. Burn. This is not negligible, being poetic, and not feeble, since it's sponsored by the greatest living Russian poet at incalculable cost. Across the street there is a house under construction, abandoned to the rain. Secretly, I shall go to work on it. Poem. Instant coffee with slightly sour cream in it, and a phone call to the beyond, which doesn't seem to be coming any nearer. Ah, Daddy, I want to stay drunk many days on the poetry of a new friend, my life held precariously in the seeing hands of others, their and my impossibilities. Is this love, now that the first love has finally died? where there were no impossibilities. The day Lady died. It is 12:20 in New York on a Friday, 3 days after Bastille Day. Yes, it is 1959, and I go get a shoe shine, because I will get off the 419 in East Hampton at 7:15, and then go straight to dinner, and I don't know the people who will feed me. I walk up the muggy street, beginning to sun, and have a hamburger and a malted, and buy an ugly New World writing to see what the poets in Ghana are doing these days. I go on to the bank, and Miss Stillwagon, her first name Linda, I once heard, doesn't even look up my balance for once in her life. And in the Golden Griffin, I get a little Verlaine for Patsy with drawings by Bernard, although I do think of Hesiod, trans Richmond Lattimore, or Brendan Behan's new play, or Le Balcon, or Les Negres of Genet, but I don't. I stick with Verlaine, and practically going to sleep with quandariness. And for Mike, I just stroll into the Park Lane liquor store and ask for a bottle of Strega, and then I go back where I came from to 6th Avenue and the Tobacconist and the Ziegfeld Theater, and casually ask for a carton of Gauloise and a carton of Picayunes and a New York Post with her face on it. And I am sweating a lot by now and thinking of leaning on the John door in the 5 spot while she whispered a song along a keyboard to Mal Waldron, and everyone and I stopped breathing. Poem. Khrushchev is coming on the right day. The cool, graced light is pushed off to the enormous glass piers by hard wind, and everything is tossing, hurrying on up. This country has everything but politesse, a Puerto Rican cab driver says. And 5 different girls I see look like Petey Gimbal with her blonde hair tossing, too. As she looked when I pushed her little daughter on the swing on the lawn. It was also windy. Last night we went to a movie and came out. Ionesco is greater than Beckett, Vincent said. That's what I think. Blueberry blintzes. And Khrushchev was probably being carped at in Washington. No politics. Vincent tells me about his mother's trip to Sweden. Hans tells us about his father's life in Sweden. It sounds like Grace Hardigan's painting, Sweden. So I go home to bed, and names drift through my head. Purgatorio, Mercado, Gerhard Schwartz, and Caspar Gonzalez. All unknown figures of the early morning as I go to work. Where does the evil of the year go? When September takes New York and turns it into ozone stalagmites, deposits of light. So I get back up, make coffee, and read Francois Villon, His Life So Dark. New York seems blinding as my tie is blowing up the street. I wish it would blow off, though it's cold and somewhat warms my neck. As the train bears Khrushchev on to Pennsylvania Station. And the light seems to be eternal, and joy seems to be inexorable. I am foolish enough always to find it in the wind.
That was fabulous, Corrine. Thank you very much. And our next wonderful reader is Valerie Elson.
Personal poem. Now, when I walk around at lunchtime, I have only two charms in my pocket: an old Roman coin Mike Kinminsky gave me, and a bolt head that broke off a package case when I was in Madrid. The others never brought me too much luck, though. They did help keep me in New York against coercion, but now I'm happy for a time and interested. I walk through the luminous humidity, passing the house of Seagram with its wet and its loungers and its construction to the left that closed the sidewalk. If I ever get to be a construction worker, I'd like to have a silver hat, please. And get to Morialty's, where I wait for Leroy and hear Who Wants to Be a Mover and Shaker. The last 5 years, my batting average is .016. That's that. And Leroy comes in and tells me Miles Davis was clubbed 12 times last night outside Birdland by a cop. The lady asks us for a nickel for a trouble disease, but we don't give her one. We don't like terrible diseases. Then we go eat some fish and some ale. It's cool, but crowded. We don't like Lionel Trilling. We decide. We like Don Allen. We won't like Henry James so much as we like Herman Melville. We don't want to be in the Poets' Walk in San Francisco, even. We just want to be rich and walk around the girders in our silver hats. I wonder if one person out of 800, actually it's 8 million, is thinking of me as I shake hands with Leroy and buy a strap for my wristwatch and go back to work happy at the thought, possibly so. Bonjour to Joan and Jean-Paul. It is 12:10 in New York, and I am wondering if I should finish this in time to meet Norman for lunch. I think I'm going crazy, what with the terrible hangover and the weekend coming up. And excitement-prone Kenneth coaches. I wish we were staying in town and working on my poems at Jones' studio for a new book by Grove Press, which they probably will not print, but it is good to be several floors up in the dead of night, wondering whether you are any good or not. And the only decision you can make is that you did it. Yesterday, I looked up the Rue Fremmecourt on a map and was happy to find it like a bird flying over Paris that says environs, which unfortunately did not include Seine-Oise, which I don't know as well as a number of other things. And Alan is back talking about God a lot, and Peter is back not talking very much, and Joe has a cold and is not coming to Kenneth's, although he is coming to lunch with Norman. I suspect he is making a distinction. Well, who isn't? I wish I were reeling around Paris instead of reeling around New York. I wish I weren't reeling at all. It is spring. The ice has melted. The Ricard is being poured. We are all happy and young and toothless. It is the same as old age. The only thing to do is simply continue. Is that simple? Yes. It is simple because it is the only thing to do. Can you do it? Yes, you can do it because it is the only thing to do. Blue light over the Bois de Boulogne. It continues, the Seine continues, the Louvre stays open, it continues, it hardly closes at all, the Bar Americain continues to be French, de Gaulle continues to be Algerian, as does Camus. Shirley Goldfarb continues to be Shirley Goldfarb, and Jane Hazard continues to be Jane Feltslicker, I think. And Irving Sandler continues to be the Voliere des artistes, and so do I. Sometimes I think I'm in love with painting, and surely the Piscade de Galigny continues to have water in it, and the Fleuve continues to have tables and newspapers and people under them, and surely we should not continue to be unhappy. We should be happy, but we shall continue to be ourselves. Everything continues to be possible. René Char, Pierre Reverdy, Samuel Beckett. It is possible, isn't it? I love Reverdy for saying yes, though I don't believe it. Ave Maria. Mothers of America, let your kids go to the movies. Get them out of the house so they won't know what you're up to. It's true that fresh air is good for the body, but what about the soul? That grows in darkness, embodied by silvery images. And when you grow old, as grow old you must, they won't hate you. They won't criticize you. They won't know. They'll be in some glamorous country they first saw on a Saturday afternoon or playing hooky. They may even be grateful to you for their first sexual experience, which only cost you a quarter and didn't upset the peaceful home. They will know where candy bars come from and gratuitous bags of popcorn, as gratuitous as leaving the movie before it's over with a pleasant stranger whose apartment is in the Heaven on Earth building near the Williamsburg Bridge. Oh, mothers, you will have made the little tyke so happy, because if nobody does pick them up in the movies, they won't know the difference. And if somebody does, it'll be sheer gravy, and they'll have been truly entertained either way, instead of hanging around the yard or up in your room hating you prematurely, since you won't have done anything horribly mean yet, except keeping them from the darker joys. It's unforgettable, the latter. So don't blame me if you won't take this advice and the family breaks up and your children grow old and blind in front of a TV set, seeing movies you wouldn't let them see when they were young. Steps. How funny you are today, New York, like Ginger Rogers in Swing Time and St. Bridget's steeple leaning a little to the left. Here I have just jumped out of bed full of V-days. I got tired of D-days. And Blue, you were there still, accepts me foolish and free. All I want is a room up there, and you. And even the traffic halt so thick is in a way for people to rub against each other. And when their surgical appliances clock, they stay together for the rest of the day. What a day. I go to check a slide and I say, that painting's not so blue. Where's Lana Turner? She's out eating, and Garbo backstage at the Met. Everyone's taking their coat off so they can show a rib cage to the rib watchers. And the park is full of dancers and their tights and shoes in a little bag, who are often mistaken for worker outers at the West Side Y. Why not? The Pittsburgh Pirates shout because they won. And in a sense, we're all winning. We're alive. The apartment was vacated by a gay couple who moved to the country for fun. They moved a day too soon. Even the stabbings are helping the population explosion, though in the wrong country. And all those lies have left the UN. The Seagram building's no longer revealed in interest. Not that we need liquor. We just like it. And the little box is out on the sidewalk next to the delicatessen, so the old man can sit on it and drink beer and got knocked off of it by his wife later in the day while the sun is still shining. Oh, God, it's wonderful to get out of bed and drink too much coffee and smoke too many cigarettes and love you so much. Poem. Lana Turner has collapsed. I was trotting along and suddenly it started raining and snowing, and you said it was hailing, but hailing hits your head on the head hard, so that it really snowing and raining. and I was in such a hurry to meet you, but the traffic was actually like the sky. And suddenly I see a headline, Lana Turner has collapsed. There is no snow in Hollywood. There is no rain in California. I have been to lots of parties and acted perfectly disgraceful, but I never actually collapsed. Oh, Lana Turner, we love you. Get up. The end. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valerie. That was wonderful. We have about 5 or 6 minutes left. Why don't we just go around? We'll start with John and then Corrine and Valerie, and just say whatever you want to say about these two poets or anything about poetry that you would like to. John?
Well, I'm curious about his death, not Richard Wilbur's death, but was it a hansom cab that knocked him over?
Well, I was living in New York City at the time, and I remember reading about it, and there were a couple of versions. One said that, he was, you don't know whether to believe it or not, these kind of tabloid type mags or journals, but it said he was, sleeping, maybe drunk on the beach in Fire Island, and a sand taxi came along. Later on, I read in the New York Times obit that it was a dune buggy. So, if you want to see specifically, you could go to the New York Times obit, but I just looked at it the other day and it said it was a dune buggy. And they probably didn't see him lying there,
But it was an accident. It wasn't somebody trying to kill him. Yeah. Wow.
Probably writing a poem in his head. He was distracted.
Sure. And he was only 40. It's hard to believe. God.
Well, and he became a hero, just like, he wrote about Hollywood figures like Jimmy Dean. And so there's a whole group of poets that follow Frank O'Hara, and they follow, that spontaneous, that the creation of a new American idiom, if you will. So you have a contrast between the two. You could use stereotypes, and you could say the first one, Richard Wilbur, was a conservative, and that in our usage today, it's derivative. But and you could say that Frank O'Hara was progressive. But I like both of them. They're both fabulous poets. So I don't think it really does any good to stereotype people in any event. But what do you think, Valerie? What would you like to say?
Oh, I'd like to see whatever everybody else is doing for now. It's difficult sometimes for me to speak without reading. But I can read well.
Anybody else want to say anything? We have several poets here. How about James Cushing? How about you, Jim?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Frank O'Hara has a marvelous ability to inspire young writers and then to inspire young people. I know, for example, that when my daughter Iris, who was, I believe, 12 or 13, was staying with me for a while, and I think Phoebe, you would remember this as well. The Museum of Contemporary Art in downtown Los Angeles was having an exhibit called "In Memory of My Feelings: Frank O'Hara and Contemporary Art." Because Frank O'Hara worked at the Museum of Modern Art in New York and was friends with Jane Freilich and Rothko and a lot of other important people. So there was an exhibit about O'Hara's contributions to art and many of the paintings that he commented on, and some collaborations that he did, and projected as a loop on the wall were some of the movies that he was involved in writing, and also that wonderful NET American Poets television special, remarkably, that he made in 1966. And so the two of us spent about 3 hours at this exhibit looking at the films and the paintings, and the next day, my daughter told me that she had figured out what she wanted to be when she grew up. which is that she wanted to be a poet the way Frank O'Hara was.
Mm.
And now she lives in New York and she's a poet.
Good for her.
But she's not like Frank O'Hara. She's like herself. so it's
Tell her not to get distracted walking along the street as he must have done.
Oh, he got very distracted walking along the street, but the street and the distraction were one.
Also, let's let John Towey, who did a marvelous presentation of Richard Wilbur.
Yes.
Most of us who studied poetry in college, we were introduced to Richard Wilbur, in college, and he's always been one of my favorites. But what would you like to say, John? You've been very close with him for many years. We'll give you the last word. We got about a minute left.
Just that we had a wonderful relationship. It was all just a pen pal relationship, but it became very personal. He wrote several letters to me, many postcards, and he wrote 2 letters to me, giving me permission to do a program of his work. He was thrilled that somebody wanted to do his poems. And so he let me do it without any, he said, do any poems that you wish to do and without any commission fees. So, the publishing house, Harcourt Brace Yovanovich, wanted $30 a poem. And they said, well, we own the rights to all of the poems, but there are 3 poems that you have chosen for your program that we don't own the rights to. Richard Wilbur does. So I had given all my credentials to Harcourt Brace Yovanovich, and they said, we will forward your letter up to Richard Wilbur. So I get a letter back from him. I don't have it. It's framed on my desk, but it's like, I'm happy that you want to do a program of my work for retirees in Southern California. And he said, please feel free to use any of my poems that suit your purposes and without any commissions fees. Best regards and good luck, Richard Wilbur. And that started our relationship. Our wives died of the same disease, of Alzheimer's, in 2007. And he wrote me a beautiful letter, which I have.
John, we need to move on to our next program. I'm so sorry, but perhaps on another Harry's Poetry Hour in the not too distant future, you can share the incredible relationship and the correspondence. I think that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, John, Corrine, and Valerie for a fabulous hour.
Harry, too. Yes.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thank
Bye,
you, Harry.
everybody.